Hello everyone, welcome back. You're watching Empyrion Galactic Survival episode 206. I'm Enigmaeus and today we're doing a bit of a tour because we've got a shockingly large task ahead of us. And if I don't do this now, it's going to be another few days before I have an episode out and people are going to be sad. They're going to think that I'm off the beam. So we're going to take a look around at what I'm working on, some of the things that I've been experimenting with, what we have yet to finish, and then we're going to get back to work and we're going to try and finish before Christmas, which is about 2 weeks away as of the time that we're making this video. So that will be the goal, is to finish by Christmas. I've been doing a little bit of work on the exterior of the ship. I finished getting the gangways, as I'm referring them to, or referring to them, over there and over there. So that's basically done. We've got these that we did in the last episode. And I started messing around with different textures because I haven't really had a chance to mess around. Just kind of spraying textures on in different colors and seeing what we kind of get out of it. And one of the ones that I came across was this one for the hull exterior. Obviously, that's where I've set it up. Very sort of conflicted as to whether or not I want to make the switch, because on one hand it's kind of interesting. It's got a little bit more detail than the ones that I'd used previously. These are the ones that we've been slowly converting it to for the last couple of weeks, if not longer. And these ones here, up the slopes and all the way up to here, you can actually see it's a little bit more white just because the texture doesn't change as often, whereas these ones it goes to kind of a grayish, a light gray, so you get a little bit of contrast. In this case, we get a more defined contrast in the lines on the panels, and the base color has got that slightly more white. It's glossy like this one. This one's fairly glossy. This one seems to be about the same. The only difficulty that I have with this texture overall is that it's got these squares, these little wee squares right here, and they repeat. Everything repeats. I mean, I can't really complain that something repeats because all of the textures do to at least some extent. The difficulty is that it's very, very regular in the way that it repeats. There's one there, and then there's a gap, and then there's another one, and then there's a gap that's the same size, and then another one. Very, very regular, and I can imagine if I were to redo this entire saucer section with this texture, these lines of squares would drive me absolutely nuts. So, like so many other things that I've talked about, this is one of those things that we just kind of leave there, and we'll evaluate over time whether we want to make the switch or whether we want to keep it the way it is. It doesn't take that long to do a complete switch of the textures and the paint on a ship of this size, ever since they added the ability to cover a larger area. But you still have to kind of fiddle with that feature. I'm done the deflector dish, finally. This is something that we put into place, and I put it into place fairly early in this entire process. Right after we finished the saucer section, basically, we got this roughed in, and like everything else, let it sit for a while and see how we think about it after a while. And there were certain things about it that just weren't working for me, and it took me all this time to kind of sit down and figure out exactly what those things were and what I could do about them. One of them was we had another row of blocks sticking out, so instead of ending here, it ended out here, and just the way that they all came together, it was just not very good. It was bugging me, and all I had to do really was come by and remove those blocks, and I didn't have to do much after that. I did do a little bit of smoothing around the back side. I could probably do a little bit more. I may do a little bit more. And then I changed the texture. This is another newish texture. It's got that pentagonal sort of thing going on. You can see it's got a little bit of gloss on the panel lines, but not a whole lot of gloss on the surface. So you get this sort of scaly effect, which with the lights reflecting off of it, I quite like, and I've decided that this is what we're going to use for the deflector dish. We're just going to keep it like this. I just have to get some paint into certain places where it just didn't stick the way that I would have liked it to. But that's basically done. Like I say, there might be some refining in the backside that I'll be working on to get that taken care of. The nacelles are probably going to be, given their size, one of the easiest things to set up, you know, in sort of the final push. You can see we've got this strip down the side that's going to be another light strip like we have on the other side over there, and then I want to close in the light strips so that they don't have such a pronounced effect lighting the interior the way that they do now. It's unavoidable with the way that light bleeds through walls at certain angles, that we have some light in the interior from that strip, but we can cut it down fairly significantly from what it is now, and we'll be doing the same thing on this side. And then the rest of the interior of the nacelles, which is quite cavernous, will be taken up with generators, RCS units, and fuel tanks. And it makes perfect sense that all of that would be in a nacelle. And also, I have to keep in mind that we at some point we're going to have to place some thrusters on this ship if we want it to be able to move. So there will be a fairly substantial presence of thrusters. And now that I think about it, I may actually go along with the thrusters right above the light strip, so that the thrusters are largely concealed unless they're active, in which case you'll probably see a little bit of the plume kind of coming out the side of the nacelle. But otherwise, we're taking advantage of an opening that already exists and using that as sort of a place to tuck the thrusters in for the lateral movement. I think that might be something to explore a little bit. But the main thing here is not so much design or anything like that. It's just fitting in enough stuff to actually make the ship viable in terms of moving. And then whatever we have left, I mean, we can leave gaps between things. We can have walkways going around things so that you can get up and work on stuff if you really want to. In terms of the interior design, this is going to be one of the lowest cost items when it comes to time. We've got this section here. There will be the transition from the main hull if you want to walk through down to the nacelles. That's how you'll do it. We have the shuttle bay in the back that we still have to finish. Mostly I think I'm just going to do a little bit of interior work with textures and colors to make it a little bit more reminiscent of something that's finished. But in terms of, you know, the fake boxes and the stacks of things, maybe I'll put some containers in the back. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me to put containers in the back of the hangars or down the sides, because this is open. It's wide open, and there won't be any doors in the back because the design of the ship doesn't really call for them. It has a force field, of course, across the back that keeps the atmosphere in and bad space things out. We don't have that option with the force fields in this game, so we'll have to figure out something else. But that would be my rationale for not having a lot of containers here. But if people wanted to put them in for function or even just looks, there's nothing stopping them from doing that. And then we have this forward section of the main hull, largely consumed by the deflector dish, but we can still get some habitable deck space in here. More than anyone would really need by rights, unless you're on a really massive server and this was retrofit to be like a base or something like that. I could see that, but realistically, more space would ever be necessary. So we're going to clip right through the roof here. This is where I've been doing a lot of the work, getting things ready to start finishing the interior, and this is where I realized just how much I have to do before I can show you guys some of the actual plans that are being put in place to make this work. So the next episode, in case you're wondering how this all ties in, the next episode will be in this space, putting in the decks and doing some of the work that will make the individual rooms and also the maintenance tubes, the Jeffries tubes, a little bit more interesting. That's going to be the focus in the next episode, but before I can do that, I have to get these walls sort of smoothed off and taken care of to at least some extent. I've basically done the central section, and I'm happy with it. It doesn't have to be more than it is right now, but the larger part is this outer section, this outer wall, all the way around, and that's what I have to do next before we can start doing that. And here you can see a little bit of experimentation with textures for the interior of the ship, because if we're going to be doing it where I have at the very least the beginning of a layout for people to get some ideas and possibly finish the interior, I would like to be able to put it together in a way that makes sense. So I was messing around with some of the new textures to get a feel for what might be the best option for some of the interiors. There's quite a lot, and the nice thing about them, one of the things that I've been thinking about is the lighting situation. If you're going to have these rooms, you don't want a lamp, one of these guys, in every single room. Just for performance reasons alone, it's not a good idea. It's going to be problematic in terms of the ship just existing as an entity in the world, and also problematic especially for people with maybe slightly dated hardware to try and render all this crap when the game is telling them you've got dozens, probably even hundreds of these lights, and which ones are of concern to be rendered and which ones are not. If we can bypass all of that with clever use of textures that already have the appearance of lights on them, then that becomes, I think, a better option. So for example, if you're walking down a hallway in a spaceship, this is not an unreasonable texture to have down most of the hallway. You've got lights up top, you've got conduits in the walls. It's a good space texture. I mean, Empyrion did a pretty good job with these, but this isn't the only candidate. We've got this one here, which is slightly more finished. Same thing with the light strips, although these appear to be on the lower section. Maybe they're not. Maybe they're on the upper section. It's hard to tell with the way all this fits together, but you get the idea. It's got these panels that are kind of interesting, look a little bit run down up here with the break, but otherwise fairly interesting. And then just to break things up, we've got all of these bizarre sort of things. We get in really close so that you can kind of see this without getting confused with everything that's around it. These are just conduits behind conduits on top of conduits around conduits, covering a wall of conduits. It's a lot of conduits, and it's got lights peeking through, which is kind of interesting. So there's this option for a texture that we can use, and as you can see, when you stack a bunch of them together, they fit together fairly well. They repeat, again, unavoidable, but there's so much going on, it's actually a little bit difficult to see where that repetition is happening. You have to specifically look for it. So there's a very strong likelihood that this is going to fit somewhere in the ship. Exactly where, we'll probably find out a little bit later. And then we have this one, which is more the circuitry and less the conduits. So we've got all kinds of lights peeking through, we've got all kinds of depth to the texture, but we aren't necessarily giving a sense of structure to any of this. This looks like something that would be held up by something else, but at the same time, it's dealing with the light issue. It's kind of interesting to look at, and in the right places, in the right amounts, I think this could be a really fun texture to work with as well. And then we've got that same texture, the first texture we were looking at, running up and down. Not the biggest fan of that. And then, of course, because we had mirror mode on when we were messing around, we ended up with all that stuff over there. Some of the other textures that I was looking at for the exterior would be something like this, but talking about repetition, you can see the repetition right in front of you. You don't even have to get 4 or 5 in a row to see what's going on there. But then when you kind of take a step back and look at it, it doesn't really stand out as much as you might think that it does. This was another candidate for the exterior hull and things that we could do that might be better than what we had done already. Just looking at the textures and throwing them on the wall and then thinking about it, not necessarily saying that I'm unhappy with what we've got now, but I think this is a pretty reasonable way to kind of get a feel for how all these things go together. And then this as well is kind of a fun texture. I can see this being used in hallways where you don't necessarily want a huge amount of detail, but you still don't want it to be just a bland wall. It obviously doesn't have any of the light panels on it, but it's got a texture to it, which I find kind of interesting. Maybe spun so that it's sideways, running horizontally instead of vertically the way that it is. And that might be a pretty good way to go. We'll see. Also, more stuff on the roof. This is the one I was just talking about. You can see, I feel horizontally it does a little bit better. There's this sort of mottled camouflage kind of thing that we were looking at. I can't imagine having that anywhere on the ship. I think it's neat if you were to want to build something and make it look like it was camouflage. This is a pretty good camouflage pattern, but it's not something that I think we're going to be able to use in this specific build. Oh, we're through the floor. It's trying to tell me something. I love the way the lights, see, when you kind of get them just right, I think they're pretty cool. If I could have these appear like this all the time, that's exactly how I would have that look for the Deflector Dish. But unfortunately, this is sort of the midway between all of the lights on the way that the game says they're supposed to be based on the settings versus all of the lights off because you're too far away. So kind of take what we can get where we can get it. So that's a lot of the stuff that I've been grappling with the last couple of days, and I wanted to kind of keep you guys in the loop because there was quite a lengthy delay between the last episode and the episode before. I didn't want to repeat that necessarily. So I'm going to be busily trying to get the interior saucer section for this small saucer taken care of so that we can look at the process of getting everything coming together. In the next episode, we'll be doing the time-lapse thing like we normally do. And then, depending on time, we're going to push outward to other parts of the ship. The main sort of focus for me after I get this little part of the saucer section done, more as an example than anything else, is to get the nacelles taken care of, because once the nacelles taken care of, most of our mobility issues will be addressed, and that's obviously kind of important. And then one way or the other, we're going to get this out before Christmas. Hooray. It's been another long build. So if you want to be notified about the next episode, see what we're working on, the easiest way to do that is to subscribe to my channel or follow me on social media. Links for social media are always in the information section below the video. Feel free to leave your comments and feedback. Thanks for watching, guys, and take care.